Well, hello. It's our first larger talk in front of a larger crowd for me, so I'm a little bit nervous. You'll have to excuse me for that. My name is Dal. I'm a senior iOS developer at DLabs, and I've prepared something for you today, a little tips and advice on continuous integration on iOS projects. I'm not going to have much code, mostly just a little bit of theory and a little bit of tips, libraries which we can use to make our life easier, especially when we're going to be unit testing, having builds all the time, and make sure that just something doesn't break in production. So if we take a look at our usual development flow, it starts with getting some kind of a spec or specification from either our client or ourselves when we're trying to build our own app. We try to write something down. Then we try to prepare a project, go Xcode, new project, yada, 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 create a Git, and so on. Then we start coding. And once we got some kind of code written down, then we decide we're going to write some tests. Is that wrong or right? It depends. Some people prefer to do the testing first, prepare unit tests, and then just write code. But some other people just prefer to write code and then write the tests later. Maybe some people prefer not to write tests at all. I don't know. And of course, on the end, when we decide we will publish the application and it goes on the App Store, we might do a little bit of beta testing first. Apple is really nice now. They bought TestFlight and so on, so we can do that really easily, I guess. But the main goal is to have the applications at some point in the App Store. So there are quite a few tools on the market to help us with this. Of course, each of them is platform specific. PHP has Capistrano, Ruby has Bundler. On iOS we have CocoaPods, Android has Gradle. There are a few tools for installing apps such as Homebrew. And of course Jenkins for continuous integration or some other service. So what is the main focus of my talk today? Basically we will take a look at what we can do in the test and publish phases, those last two which I mentioned. And before we even go to create something very good continuous integration process, it's probably good to have some tests. Otherwise, it does not help as much as it could. So we'll start by just having a look what test cases can we cover. So basically, there are a lot more test cases than I've actually wrote here, but those are kind of the main ones which we focus on. First, of course, are the unit tests. These are very small components being tested by code. Try to decouple it as much as possible and try to get rid of any dependencies you might have on the way. The second one is integration tests. This basically connects all those small components and gives them a little larger modules, and then just tests them if they are working correctly together. And if we still have a lot of time left, which we usually don't, but it's probably wise to still do some UI testing. That means all the buttons are correctly placed, they're all reachable on different kind of screens, and just making sure that the user can click everything, all the animations are completed in the correct time without any delays. And if possible, just add some performance testing that if we click some button 100 times, that something wouldn't crash in between. So for unit testing, Xcode 6 ships with XT-test framework, which is kind of quite nice in the latest revisions. Before it was OC test, which was terrible as far as I remember. I couldn't get on using that. But it's still a little bit clunky, I believe. Basically, it's just writing lines of code, doing the asserts, comparing, the usual kind of stuff. But there are some better things, which, for example, is Kiwi, which is a framework, basically a library, that's based on behavior-driven testing. And its syntax is a little bit different, and it makes writing the test a little bit shorter. Are any maybe Ruby developers here around? No, only CocoaHeads. Okay, that's good. Well, the third I would like to mention is a combination of two small libraries, which are Specta and Xpecta. Those are RSpec based, which is kind of similar syntax to Ruby. And it kind of gives us a descriptive format to write our tests in either test-driven development or behavior-driven development. But which one should we choose? I guess this is still up to everyone to choose their own, which one they feel the most comfortable with. But for me, I really much don't like that code on the left side and really like the code on the right side. Why? Especially with asynchronous testing, it's a little bit easier to see what is going on. Just went a little bit too far, sorry. Missions are making me a mess. Okay, that'll finish. So the point here is each time we have asynchronous tests, we have to create an expectation object, give it a description, load a block, do an assert, and then do another fail if the expectation doesn't finish. But on the other side, we have an RSpec test. This is actually Xpecta. Kiwi is a little bit different, but pretty much the same way. We expect some property, some objects to be equal to yes, or to be equal to nil, or to not be equal to nil. Or in the case of asynchronous testing, we have an operator which is called will. So we expect something will be equal to something, or it will not be nil. We can actually change the delay as well, but this is some kind of predefined delay which works pretty good in most cases, except for really, really bad networks. I'm not going to go especially about integration testing, just because it's basically pretty much the same. Just uses objects that we already tested with unit tests and puts them kind of together to make sure they're working. But I will stop with UI testing. Why do we actually need to unit test? Of course, with the release of iPhone 6 and 6 Plus, there's a lot of mess in the screen sizes. It's still not Android, but it's a little bit more screens to test for, so we need to make sure that we also check other screens. What's been happening a lot is that we quickly forget about the 4S, and then we see that we're missing a couple of views on the screen, on the small ones. And the next thing is animations. Animations, we do define the delays, we do define the time intervals, but we're not exactly sure if they will actually execute in the same way. If we have a slower device, maybe A4 chip on iPhone 4 could be a little bit tricky because it's still not real-time OS. So it is a good idea to check and what happens if we kind of cancel one in between. There were a lot of crashes. One of them is, which I've had recently, is really fun. I was using, this was actually the case, I was getting a push notification, and then when I received it, I kind of pushed some new view controller on the navigation stack. And what happens is that user in the same second pushed their own view controller on the top of the navigation stack, and the app just crashed because you can't push two of them at the same time if they're both animated. So this is something we need to be careful of, and it's very wise to have some kind of UI automation tests prepared to handle these kind of cases. And the last one is, of course, to have user flows tested. If we change some code, if we change some view controller, we still want, in most cases, to have the user flows pretty much the same. If we, for example, if we add some button, we still want the users to be able to log in the same way. It's a simple example. So it's really wise to spend a little bit of extra time doing some UI testing. Okay, next, I'm going to continue with continuous integration. Who here knows exactly what continuous integration is? Can someone help me out? There in the back. You guys were talking before. Can you explain what is continuous integration in your opinion? think we'll see who, yeah.
Commit, test, deploy.
Commit, test, deploy. Yeah. Okay. That's true, of course, but on iOS things get usually a little bit more complicated, which we'll see a little bit later on. First, yeah, it's commit. And then we try to have a clear solution. We don't want any pre-built, previously built prefix files or PCH files. Then we want the tests to go through. And then we can build the application like we should for deploying. And usually we're also interested in some kind of reports. We want to see how many tests passed, which tests failed, and so on. And on the end, we have some kind of yay output. So for a very long time, I think the first release was with iOS 7 with Xcode 5 that Apple actually did something here, which they provided us some kind of a bot system, which I'm still not sure how exactly that works. It's packaged with a lot of UI, and it's kind of really fancy. It has this nice UI, it has a nice web panel. But I've tried it a couple times. I found it a little bit clunky to set up with the certificates and provisioning profiles. They didn't update correctly, and I had code signing errors all the time. So I kind of went, well, Apple, in 2 or 3 years, we'll try it again. But people try to do a lot of different stuff. So open source community on iOS is really strong, which I really like. And the one thing I found missing from the Xcode one is this distribution part, which is basically when all the tests pass, the application builds correctly, we want to actually send it to some kind of service that will be able for our testers that our testers will be able to test from it. And on the end, of course, deploy it to the App Store. So first, we need an online service. We need to choose some kind of distribution service. I've wrote a couple of them here. First one is TestFlight, which is recently retired by Apple, but they kind of integrated it in iOS 8. So if you go search to the App Store and find some kind of app that's called TestFlight, that's it. That's the one by Apple. They do allow 20 internal testers, I think, and up to 1,000 external testers. But you need to tell the Apple ID account, the email, so each one of them has to add you, and their iTunes Connect portal is still a little bit beta. I don't know if anyone has heard of an incident a couple of days ago, which if you logged into iTunes Connect, you kind of got into a wrong account, and someone just happened to be BlackBerry on the side and go, whoa, I had a lot of apps. How that happened? So it's still a little bit, I think, like kind of a beta product. It's not ready yet, in my opinion. And they do want to review the beta builds as well, but it takes a little bit longer, I think up to 24 hours. The next one is Crashlytics Beta, which we are currently using. It has a lot of heavy UI, but underneath it's a really strong platform. It allows for both Android and iOS distribution. And the good thing is it's also completely free. Next one is Hockey App. It's a little bit more powerful service, has a lot of integrations, but it's a premium service. So if you're really doing this a lot, it's maybe worth the money, but for keeping simple, Crashlytics usually does everything you need. And the last one is Deploygate. I've only checked this 2 times. It's also premium, but I think they're quickly catching up to Hockey App, at least with their user base. Okay, let's say we choose some kind of service that we will use. Any kind of service basically has some kind of API to load the IPA files on, but it's usually very different. They use team tokens, they use API tokens, they use groups, they use teams, a lot. So, when someone wishes to see what we're working on, and we want to give them some kind of preview of our work, This is kind of our process. First, we choose a distribution service. Okay, we have it, then we go on, enter a long list of emails to invite all the testers. We wait for them to register because we need their UDID identifiers for their devices so they're able to actually run our app. After a while, they do register, they forget to add the devices, and then, of course, when they finally sign up completely, we have to go through all the list and see which devices we don't have on our developer portal, and we slowly add them one at a time. And after that's done, we need to update the provisioning profile. Again, we need to check all the devices which we want to have in the testing group. And after we do that, we download it, update our own. Xcode has a nice refresh button for that. And then we build the application with the new provisioning profile. Of course, we need to run the test to make sure everything is still good. We didn't break anything. After that, let's assume it's a success. There were no code signing errors, the provisioning profile is fine. And then we create an archive. I think every one of us, at least one, did that already. Then we have to package the archive. We have to select the provisioning profile again. And when we have that, let's hope we can sign and export the Xcode IPA file, which we have our final build of the application. And then we can upload it to a service. So Crashlytics now provides a small menu app that kind of solves this for us. When others, you have to just open their web page and drag and drop it or something similar. Then we have to let the testers know what they should be testing, what's new in this build. We have to write a changelog, of course. And we still have to select from our entire testing base the testers we want to receive the first build. And of course, this repeats for every build. You know, I was like that a couple of months ago, but it really doesn't have to be that way. There are a lot of tools on the market, especially open source, that solve at least major problems for us. So first is GitHub, which has a lot of service hooks available and it integrates quite a lot. Is there anyone here that uses something else aside from GitHub for their development? Bitbucket? Yeah, okay. Bitbucket's also good. Anything else?
GitLab, Git as such, GitOS is on the server, so other things.
Okay, but everyone else uses GitHub. So you see where I'm going. It's quite a good platform, I believe. Okay, then we have a couple of bash scripts that we can actually tie things together. We have Ruby, which is easy and useful to quickly write some tools. Or we can use existing gems. We have Homebrew that automatically installs in command line for us some CocoaPod tools or XT tool, for example, which is Facebook build tool. And we, of course, need a CI server. There are a couple of problems which I've encountered, and I'd just like to point them out here quickly. The first one is loading UDIDs from the devices. The second one is adding devices to Apple, modifying provisioning profiles, installing certificates, of course downloading them again, notifications, building the apps, running tests, and signing the application. For most of those, I will just stop at the first one for a little bit. How do we read UDIDs? They're on the web page, they're on the service, and we want to get them all down and actually see which ones are new. So we have a gem, a really simple command. And we install this and enter our credentials and just run one command, and it will actually just download all the UDIDs and currently supports TestFlight and Crashlytics. But the problems begin actually when you try to connect to Apple Developer Portal. Do Apple actually care for us? Not as much. They don't have any API for this, but we do have other tools, which are kind of web scraping scripts that actually connect to iTunes, or sorry, to developer portal, and load the devices down. We can then compare them and just add the ones that are missing. I would only like to mention the Cupertino gem, which is also a Ruby gem made by Matt Thompson. I think most of us at least used one library of his, AF networking, for example. This is also his tool. And it actually works pretty great. It helps also loading loading provisioning profiles and app IDs. Next thing are the Xcode command line tools. We mostly use XTtool, which is kind of a wrapper around Xcode build. And it allows for building, testing, reporting. If you like to write your own reporter, it has an API for that. And it also runs tests in parallel, which really speeds up the continuous integration build. And on the end, we have to upload a build. And there's another gem for that. It's called Shenzhen. He likes to name the gems after some cities. And it connects to iTunes Connect, Crashlytics Beta, Hockey app, and TestFlight. And it will take any IPA you build and upload it right onto their servers. So in general, we have this kind of a development cycle. We have first a git push, which usually triggers a CI build. Then new devices are loaded, provisioning profiles are updated, then the application is built, signed with the certificate, and of course the newest provisioning profile, and then we distribute it to the service. So altogether, I wrote a tool that's basically a bash script which kind of connects this. It works on any server. It has notifications, very little setup. Basically, you only need to specify the test SDKs and build SDKs, and it uses Git to be triggered, of course. But there's also another tool. I wouldn't like to go into the specifics because we're a little limited on time. There's another tool called Fastlane, which is made by some guy working, I think, in the UK. His name is Felix. He really did a lot of tools, including automatic screenshotting of your tests and similar. And that's pretty much it. Here are a couple of links, which I've mentioned in this talk. These slides will, of course, be shared, so if anyone wants to check this out, they can. Basically, that's it. Are there any questions, maybe? I know I've rushed a little bit, and my slides are not working really good. There, okay. So, any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Where will the slides be available?
Slide deck. And the link will be on the Meetup group.
Yeah. Provided, of course, on Meetup and Facebook and Twitter and everywhere. So, yeah. No questions? Nothing? In that case, thank you, Dal.
Thank you.